Daniel Brooks had mastered survival. Not success. Not luxury. Not power. Survival. Every morning in New York City started the same way, 6 a.m. alarm, quiet apartment, the faint hum of traffic already alive outside the window. He would wake before the sun, make breakfast, pack a small lunchbox with careful precision, and gently knock on his daughter Emma's door. "Up, sunshine," he'd whisper. Because before he was a senior operations manager, before he answered emails at midnight, before he carried the weight of corporate expectations on his shoulders, he was a single father. And that mattered more than anything. By 8:30 a.m., Daniel would trade school drop-offs for skyscrapers. Manhattan didn't slow down for anyone, especially not for a widowed dad trying to balance parenthood and boardrooms. Harrington Media stood tall among the glass giants of the city. A symbol of power, precision, influence. And at the very top of that tower was Victoria Hayes. Magazines like Forbes and Business Insider called her unstoppable. Financial analysts called her visionary. Competitors called her dangerous. Employees? They called her untouchable. Victoria Hayes was elegant wrapped in steel. Tailored suits. Perfect posture. Voice sharp enough to cut through any room. She didn't smile often. She didn't hesitate. And she never let anyone see weakness. Especially not in a building full of executives waiting for her to slip. Daniel respected her. But he never feared her. Because Daniel understood something most people didn't. Even the strongest people get tired. The rooftop party was supposed to be a celebration. A record-breaking quarter. Investor satisfaction at an all-time high. Expansion into European markets. The Manhattan skyline glittered behind the terrace like a sea of diamonds. Crystal glasses clinked. A live jazz trio played softly in the background. Cameras flashed as executives laughed a little too loudly. Daniel stood near the edge of the terrace, loosening his tie slightly, observing. That's when he noticed the shift. Victoria stood near the center of the rooftop in a sleek black gown, effortlessly commanding attention even in silence. Beside her was Lucas Grant, tech investor, media darling, and her fiancé. They looked perfect on paper. But something felt off. Lucas wasn't smiling. He was tense. Jaw tight. Words short. At first, it looked like a quiet disagreement. Then his voice rose just enough to cut through the music. "You're married to your company, Victoria." The nearby conversations faltered. "There's no room for me." The words hung heavy in the air. Victoria's expression didn't crack, not immediately. She stood tall, chin slightly lifted. "If this is about tonight," she began calmly. "It's about every night," Lucas interrupted. "Every cancelled dinner. Every postponed trip. Every time I come second to your board." A few executives turned discreetly away. No one wanted to witness the collapse of power. "I built this company before I met you," Victoria said, controlled but firm. "And you'll die with it," Lucas shot back. "Alone." Silence swallowed the rooftop. Then he did the unthinkable. He stepped back. And walked away. Just like that. No dramatic scene. No tears. Just a clean, public ending. Victoria stood frozen under the string lights, city wind brushing against her hair, cameras lowering slowly as whispers began. Daniel saw it. The crack. It wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. But he saw her shoulders drop half an inch. He saw her fingers tighten around the stem of her champagne glass. He saw the moment the untouchable CEO became painfully human. An hour later, the party continued, because in Manhattan, even heartbreak keeps a schedule. Daniel slipped away from the crowd. He knew where she'd go. The executive conference room on the 42nd floor overlooked the entire city. It was Victoria's sanctuary. Her thinking space. When he opened the door gently, the room was dim except for the glow of city lights pouring through the glass walls. Victoria sat at the head of the table. Her heels were off, resting carelessly beside her chair. Her perfectly applied mascara now faintly smudged beneath tired eyes. She wasn't crying. She was staring. At the skyline. At the empire she built. At the cost of it. Daniel said softly. She didn't turn immediately. For a moment, she simply breathed. Then quietly, almost fragile. Did everyone see? There it was. Not anger. Not pride. Vulnerability. Daniel didn't sugarcoat it. Yes, he said gently. They did. Her jaw tightened slightly. But they'll forget. A small, broken laugh escaped her lips. I don't forget. Daniel stepped closer but kept a respectful distance. He reached into his pocket and offered her a simple white tissue. No grand speech. No corporate reassurance. Just humanity. She accepted it. Do you know what hurts the most? She asked quietly, still staring at the lights below. Not that he left. But that he thought I would choose this company over him. Daniel considered his words carefully. You didn't choose the company over him. She finally looked at him. He left because he couldn't keep up with you, Daniel said calmly. That's not weakness. He held her gaze. That's power. The room fell silent again. But this silence was different. It wasn't heavy. It was shifting. Victoria studied him as if seeing him for the first time. Not as the dependable operations manager. Not as the employee who solved crises before they reached her desk. But as a man who wasn't intimidated by her success. A man who didn't see her ambition as competition. A man who wasn't afraid to tell her the truth. You're very bold tonight, Mr. Brooks, she said softly. Daniel allowed a faint smile. Only when it's necessary. For the first time that evening, her lips curved, not into a practiced CEO smile, but something real. Something small. Something grateful. Outside, Manhattan continued to pulse with life. But inside that conference room, something quieter was happening. Victoria Hayes, the woman labeled unstoppable, brilliant, untouchable, was no longer standing on a rooftop stage. She was sitting barefoot in a dim room, mascara slightly smudged, heart unexpectedly exposed. And Daniel Brooks, the single dad who had mastered survival, had just become the only person in the building who saw her not as a symbol. Not as a headline. Not as a CEO. But as a woman who had been left behind. And somehow, that was the beginning of everything. The morning after the breakup, Harrington Media didn't collapse. Stocks didn't fall. Investors didn't panic. On the surface, nothing changed. But inside the glass walls of the 42nd floor, everything had. Victoria Hayes arrived at 7 a.m. sharp, just like always. Tailored ivory suit. Hair flawless. Expression composed. If anyone expected weakness, they were disappointed. But Daniel noticed the difference. She moved with precision, not passion. She spoke with clarity, not fire. There was no spark in her eyes during the executive briefing. No sharp, strategic interruptions. No challenging questions that once kept directors awake at night. She was present. But distant. Daniel watched carefully. Because when you've spent years raising a child alone, you learn how to recognize silent pain. It's never loud. It hides in routine. By noon, rumors had already started weaving through departments. They were engaged, right? He walked out at the party. I heard she chose the company over him. Victoria ignored it. But Daniel didn't. He quietly redirected conversations. Reassigned meeting leads. Took over a tense client call so she wouldn't have to. He wasn't protecting her image. He was protecting her energy. Late that evening, long after most employees had left, Daniel remained in his office, sleeves rolled up, reviewing campaign projections. That's when the elevator doors opened again. Victoria stepped out. Without her jacket. Without the armor. She paused when she saw light coming from his office. "You're still here?" she asked. "Always," he replied gently. She stepped inside, leaning against the doorway. "You don't have to carry everything." Daniel smiled faintly. "I know." There was something softer about her tonight. Less guarded. She glanced around the office, and then she noticed it. A small pink backpack beside his desk. Her brow furrowed. Before she could ask, a tiny voice spoke from the corner couch. "Daddy." Victoria turned. And there she was. Emma. Curled up under a small blanket, rubbing her sleepy eyes. Daniel stood quickly. "Hey, sweetheart. Go back to sleep." Victoria's world shifted in that moment. The most feared CEO in Manhattan stood frozen, staring at a little girl in pajamas decorated with cartoon stars. "My babysitter cancelled," Daniel explained quietly. "I didn't want to miss the board prep." Emma looked at Victoria curiously. "Are you Daddy's boss?" Victoria blinked. Yes." Emma tilted her head thoughtfully. "You don't look scary." Daniel tried not to laugh. Victoria, for the first time in days, felt warmth rise in her chest. "I hope that's a good thing," she said softly. Emma nodded seriously. "Daddy says strong women aren't scary. Just honest." Victoria glanced at Daniel. He looked slightly embarrassed. But he didn't deny it. Daniel gently tucked Emma back under the blanket. His movements were careful. Protective. Natural. Victoria watched him kneel beside the couch, adjusting the blanket, brushing hair away from Emma's forehead. The room felt different. Not corporate. Not cold. Human. "You bring her here often?" Victoria asked quietly. "Only when I have no other choice," he replied. "She knows the office rules better than some interns." That earned a small smile. Victoria moved closer, lowering her voice. "Does she ever complain?" Daniel shook his head. "She says she likes seeing where her dad works. Makes her feel proud." The word lingered. Proud. Victoria had built an empire. But no one had ever said they were proud to simply watch her work. She sat down across from him. "When Lucas found out you brought Emma here sometimes," she said slowly, "he called it unprofessional." Daniel didn't react with anger. He just shrugged lightly. "My daughter isn't a liability." "No," Victoria said softly. "She isn't." Silence stretched between them. Comfortable. Unusual. Dangerous. The skyline outside shimmered in late evening gold. Victoria leaned back slightly, studying him. "Why didn't you ever remarry?" It was a personal question. One she normally wouldn't dare ask an employee. Daniel didn't look offended. "My wife passed away 8 years ago," he said calmly. "Cancer." The air shifted. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He nodded once. "At first, I thought I needed to replace what I lost. For Emma's sake. For mine." He paused. "But love isn't about replacing someone." He met her eyes. "It's about protecting what still matters." Victoria swallowed. Lucas had loved her ambition. He admired her influence. He boasted about her success. But he never understood her loneliness. Daniel did. Without her explaining it. They worked side by side for another hour, reviewing contracts and adjusting numbers. At one point, both reached for the same file. Their fingers brushed. It was accidental. But neither pulled away immediately. The touch was brief. Yet charged. Not inappropriate. Not reckless. Just aware. Victoria felt something unfamiliar settle inside her chest. Not adrenaline. Not desire. Safety. Daniel cleared his throat gently, moving his hand back. I should probably get her home. Victoria nodded. But as he lifted Emma into his arms, something in her tightened. The sight of him holding his daughter, protective, steady, grounded, stirred something she had buried beneath boardrooms and balance sheets. Daniel, she said quietly. He paused at the door. Yes? You don't have to shield me from gossip. He looked at her carefully. I'm not shielding you. Then why are you taking over meetings? He gave a small, honest smile. Because you don't need to prove anything this week. Her breath caught slightly. Most men in her world competed with her strength. Daniel simply supported it. After he left, Victoria remained in the quiet office. The building lights dimmed automatically. She walked to the glass window and looked down at the city. For the first time since the breakup, she didn't feel abandoned. She felt seen. Daniel Brooks wasn't flashy. He didn't have Lucas's investor charisma. He didn't command headlines. But he had something far more dangerous. Integrity. And warmth. And a quiet kind of loyalty that didn't demand applause. Victoria touched the glass lightly. Somewhere in the city below, a single father was driving home with his sleeping daughter in the back seat. And for reasons she couldn't yet explain. That image meant more to her than any diamond ring ever had. The unstoppable CEO of Harrington Media had always believed power was control. But tonight, she was beginning to understand something else. Power wasn't about being untouchable. It was about choosing who you let close enough to see you break. And Daniel Brooks was closer than she ever expected. And that terrified her. Because this time, if she fell, it wouldn't be in front of investors. It would be in front of the one man who didn't need her title to respect her. And that made everything infinitely more complicated. Manhattan has a heartbeat. Fast. Relentless. Curious. And it loves a story. Especially when that story involves a powerful CEO and the single father who suddenly seems to be everywhere by her side. By Monday morning, the whispers had grown teeth. Victoria Hayes entered the building the same way she always did, straight posture, steady stride, expression composed. Cameras outside the lobby flashed for routine business coverage, unaware that the real headlines were forming inside the glass walls above. Daniel walked in 10 minutes later, Emma's pink backpack no longer beside his desk, but somehow, her presence still lingered. People noticed. They always do. In the elevator, 2 junior analysts fell silent as Daniel stepped in. On the 32nd floor, a marketing associate accidentally paused her conversation when Victoria walked past. The air had shifted. And not in a good way. Inside the executive boardroom, tension hummed beneath the polished mahogany table. Victoria stood at the head of the room, presenting quarterly projections. Her voice was firm. Controlled. But she could feel it. Eyes watching longer than usual. Silence stretching where feedback should have been. Then, halfway through her presentation, one of the senior board members cleared his throat. Victoria, he began carefully, we fully support your leadership. However, optics matter. She didn't blink. Be specific. He shifted slightly in his seat. There are rumors circulating about you and Mr. Brooks. The room grew still. Daniel, seated halfway down the table, kept his expression neutral. Rumors, Victoria repeated coolly. Yes, another executive added. After the engagement ended, people are suggesting that perhaps boundaries have blurred. The implication hung heavy. Victoria felt heat rise in her chest, not from guilt, but from insult. Are you questioning my professionalism? She asked calmly. No, the first man replied quickly. But perception influences investors. Daniel spoke before he could stop himself. With respect, he said evenly, my job performance remains unchanged. Victoria's eyes flicked toward him. Strong. Steady. Loyal. That's not the issue, another board member said. The issue is vulnerability. The market senses weakness. Weakness. The word echoed in Victoria's mind. Lucas had called her emotionally unavailable. Now her board was suggesting she was emotionally unstable. It was never enough. She straightened slightly. Let me be absolutely clear, she said, her voice sharpening like glass. My personal life does not dictate this company's strength. Silence. And Daniel Brooks, she continued, is the reason our West Coast merger succeeded last quarter. If anyone here questions his integrity, bring evidence. No one spoke. Because there was none. The meeting ended shortly after. But the damage lingered. Later that afternoon, Victoria stood near the large windows of her private office, staring at the city below. She heard the knock before it came. Daniel. You didn't have to defend me like that, he said gently. She didn't turn immediately. Yes, I did. He stepped inside, closing the door softly. This will only fuel the gossip. I don't care about gossip. You should, he replied quietly. You're the CEO. She turned then. And you're my operations manager. If anyone undermines you, they undermine me. Her tone wasn't romantic. It was protective. And that made it more dangerous. Daniel studied her carefully. This isn't about work anymore, he said softly. Her breath caught, just slightly. Isn't it? She challenged. He stepped closer, but still maintained distance. No, he answered honestly. It stopped being just about work the night you let me see you cry. The words landed between them like truth neither could escape. Victoria felt her defenses flicker. I didn't let you, she said quietly. You walked in. And you didn't tell me to leave. Silence. Because he was right. That evening, as employees filtered out and office lights dimmed, the whispers grew louder. Two executives stood near the coffee station. She's compromised. He's ambitious. He's positioning himself. The door behind them opened. Victoria stepped in. Neither man had expected her. She didn't raise her voice. Didn't shout. Didn't threaten. She simply looked at them. If you have concerns about my leadership, she said calmly, schedule a formal meeting. If you have gossip, keep it out of my building. Her words were ice. They apologized quickly. Because power doesn't always need volume. Sometimes it just needs certainty. Meanwhile, Daniel sat alone in his office, staring at a spreadsheet he hadn't read in 10 minutes. He wasn't afraid of losing his job. He was afraid of becoming the reason she did. He thought about Emma. About stability. About headlines that could twist narratives beyond recognition. He'd worked too hard to build a quiet life. And Victoria's world was anything but quiet. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Victoria stepped inside. This time, without invitation. We need to talk, she said. He nodded. She closed the door behind her. The office suddenly felt smaller. More personal. They think you're using me, she said bluntly. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. And what do you think? She stepped closer. I think you're the only person here who doesn't. Their eyes locked. The tension was no longer subtle. It was undeniable. You don't know what this could cost you, he said softly. I've lost worse. The vulnerability in her voice wasn't loud, but it was real. Daniel swallowed. Victoria. She rarely allowed him to use her first name. Tonight, she didn't correct him. I'm not afraid of whispers, he continued. I'm afraid of becoming a distraction. You're not a distraction. Then what am I? The question lingered. Her answer took longer than expected. She hesitated, searching for language she wasn't used to speaking. You're steady. His heart shifted at that. In a world that's always trying to pull something from me, she continued quietly, you're the only one who doesn't want anything. That wasn't entirely true. He wanted her safe. He wanted her respected. He wanted her happy. But none of those came with conditions. I care about you, he said finally. There it was. No dramatic confession. No grand gesture. Just truth. The room stilled. Outside the window, Manhattan glowed with endless motion. Inside, time slowed. Victoria felt something crack open in her chest. Not weakness. Not desperation. Recognition. She stepped even closer now, close enough to feel the warmth of him, but not touching. Daniel, she whispered, if we cross this line, there's no going back. He nodded once. I know. Her pulse quickened. For years, she had controlled every negotiation, every acquisition, every risk. But this? This wasn't a calculated move. It was a choice. A dangerous one. Because this time, if she fell, it wouldn't be a fiancé walking away. It would be the only man who saw her not as a headline, but as a woman. And for the first time in her powerful, structured, carefully managed life. Victoria Hayes realized something terrifying. She didn't want him to walk away. And that was the most vulnerable position she had ever been in. The headline started on Thursday morning. Not about the company. Not about market growth. About her. Tech CEO's engagement collapse sparks workplace romance rumors. Victoria stared at the article on her tablet, jaw tight but expression unreadable. They had no proof. No photos. Just speculation. But speculation in Manhattan spreads faster than truth. Downstairs, outside Harrington Media's glass entrance, photographers had gathered. Not for quarterly earnings. For scandal. Daniel saw them when he pulled into the underground parking garage. His grip tightened on the steering wheel. He wasn't naive. He knew what this meant. For Victoria, it was reputation. For him, it was stability. And for Emma, it could become confusion. He stepped out of his car and paused for a moment, breathing slowly before heading inside. When the elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, the atmosphere was heavy. Assistants whispered more carefully. Phones rang louder than usual. And Victoria stood in the center of it all, composed, powerful, unshaken. At least on the surface. Their eyes met briefly across the room. It wasn't romantic. It was understanding. Later that afternoon, an unexpected message arrived. Lucas Grant was downstairs. Requesting a meeting. Of course he was. Victoria considered ignoring him. But she didn't. Because unfinished conversations leave weak endings. And she refused to be weak. The private lounge on the 40th floor overlooked the Hudson River. Neutral tones. Soft lighting. Privacy. Lucas stood when she entered. He looked polished, confident, the version of himself the media adored. Victoria, he said smoothly. You look well. I am, she replied evenly. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. I made a mistake. She didn't react. You were right, he continued. I couldn't keep up. But that doesn't mean I stopped loving you. Love. The word felt distant now. You left publicly, she said calmly. You humiliated me. Lucas exhaled. I was emotional. You were threatened. His expression hardened slightly. And now, she asked. He hesitated. Now I see you pulling away from everything we built, for an employee. There it was. Not regret. Competition. Victoria's spine straightened. Daniel has nothing to do with this. Doesn't he? Lucas challenged. The entire city is talking. She stepped closer, voice steady but cold. The city talks because it's bored. I make decisions based on facts. And what are the facts? He pressed. She held his gaze. You walked away. Silence. Outside, river water shimmered in afternoon light. Lucas softened his tone. I can fix this. We can fix this. Therapy. Time off. I'll move my investments here. I'll make you a priority. The promises sounded polished. Practiced. But hollow. Because somewhere deep inside, Victoria realized something unsettling. Lucas was offering compromise. Daniel offered presence. At that exact moment, 2 floors below, Daniel was in his office reviewing supply chain projections when his phone buzzed. Emma's school. His heart jumped. He answered immediately. Mr. Brooks, Emma had a small fall during recess. She's fine, just a scraped knee, but she's asking for you. He didn't hesitate. I'm on my way. He grabbed his jacket, ignoring curious stares as he headed for the elevator. As he reached the lobby, camera flashes exploded. Reporters shouted questions. Are you involved with the CEO? Did the engagement end because of you? Daniel shielded his face, pushing through quietly. He didn't answer. Didn't defend. Didn't fuel it. Upstairs, Victoria's phone vibrated with notifications. Photos already circulating. Daniel leaving the building hurriedly. Speculation multiplying. Lucas noticed her distraction. See, he said softly. This is what happens when lines blur. Her jaw tightened. But not because of Daniel. Because of how quickly Lucas assumed the worst. My concern right now, she said calmly, is not headlines. She turned toward the window. It's whether I'm about to repeat a mistake. Lucas stepped closer. And what mistake is that? She faced him fully now. Choosing someone who loves my success, but not my reality. His silence was answer enough. An hour later, Victoria made a decision that surprised even herself. She left the building. No security escort. No driver. Just her. She found herself outside a small elementary school in Brooklyn. Parents stood in clusters. Children laughed. Normal life unfolded. Daniel stood near the playground bench, kneeling in front of Emma, carefully placing a cartoon bandage over her scraped knee. Emma sniffled but smiled. Does it look cool? She asked. Very cool, Daniel replied gently. Victoria watched from a distance. No cameras. No board members. No expectations. Just a father choosing his daughter without hesitation. Without calculation. Emma noticed her first. Miss Victoria, she called excitedly. Daniel turned, surprised. Victoria stepped forward slowly. I was nearby, she said softly. It wasn't entirely true. Is she all right? Battle scar, Daniel smiled faintly. She'll survive. Emma grinned proudly. Victoria crouched slightly. You're very brave. Emma nodded seriously. Daddy says strong girls don't cry long. Victoria glanced at Daniel. There it was again. Strength, but gentle. Not sharp. Not competitive. Just steady. Lucas had asked her to choose comfort. Daniel didn't ask her to choose anything. And somehow, that mattered more. That evening, back at the office, Lucas waited for her answer. Well, he asked. Victoria took a slow breath. I can fix my old life, she said honestly. I can choose what's predictable. Lucas's expression brightened slightly. But I won't. His face fell. This isn't about another man, she continued firmly. It's about realizing I deserve someone who doesn't see my ambition as a rival. You'll regret this, he said quietly. She shook her head. No. I would regret settling. He left without another word. This time, she didn't watch him go. Night settled over Manhattan. Victoria stood alone in her office for a moment before walking down the hall. Daniel was gathering his things. He looked up when she entered. "Everything okay?" he asked gently. She closed the door behind her. "Yes." He studied her carefully. "And Lucas?" She stepped closer. He offered comfort. Daniel nodded once. "And?" Her voice softened. "I don't want comfort." Silence filled the room. "I want honesty," she continued. "I want steadiness. I want someone who chooses what matters, even when it's inconvenient." Daniel's heart pounded. "Victoria." She stepped into his space now, close enough that the air felt charged. "I can go back," she whispered. "I can undo the headlines. I can repair the image." He swallowed. "And what do you want?" Her eyes shone, not with tears, but certainty. "I want something real." The distance between them felt electric. Terrifying. Beautiful. Because this time, it wasn't about gossip. Or investors. Or public perception. It was about a choice. And Victoria Hayes, the woman who built empires without flinching, was finally ready to choose not power, but love. The city never sleeps. But for the first time in years, Victoria Hayes did. Not because the headline stopped. Not because the board suddenly approved. Not because the rumors faded. But because she had made her choice. And peace doesn't come from silence. It comes from certainty. Daniel stood in his office, heart still racing from her words the night before. "I want something real." He replayed it over and over. He had spent years building a careful life. Structured. Stable. Safe for Emma. He didn't chase risk. He avoided it. And loving Victoria Hayes? That wasn't safe. That was standing in the middle of Manhattan traffic and trusting the world to stop. The next morning, the board requested an emergency session. Victoria walked in alone. No lawyers. No advisors. Just her. The room felt colder than usual. One senior director spoke first. "The press narrative is gaining traction. Investors are questioning leadership stability." Victoria folded her hands calmly on the table. "My leadership has never been unstable." "This relationship," another executive began cautiously, "is not your jurisdiction," she interrupted, calm but firm. A murmur spread across the table. She continued, "I have delivered record growth, international expansion, and a successful merger in under 3 years. If any of you believe my personal life affects my ability to lead, present data." Silence. Because there was none. Finally, the chairman leaned forward. "Victoria, are you prepared for the consequences?" She didn't hesitate. Yes. Not because she was reckless, but because for the first time in her life, she wasn't negotiating from fear. Meanwhile, Daniel was called into human resources. He knew what it meant. The polite smiles. The careful tone. "Daniel, you understand how this appears," the HR director said gently. "I do. You're valued here. But public relationships between executive leadership and management can create complications." He exhaled slowly. "I've never leveraged my position. We know. And I never would." The director studied him carefully. "Are you prepared if this changes your career path?" Daniel thought about Emma. About stability. About grocery lists and school fees and bedtime stories. Then he thought about Victoria standing alone in a boardroom defending him without hesitation. "Yes," he answered quietly. He wasn't choosing ambition. He was choosing integrity. That evening, Victoria stood on the rooftop terrace again. The same place where Lucas had walked away. The same skyline. But a different woman. She heard footsteps behind her. Daniel. For a moment, neither spoke. The wind brushed gently through the city lights below. "I told the board," she said softly. "And," he asked. "I'm not apologizing for who I care about." His chest tightened. "I spoke to HR." She turned toward him. "And?" "I told them I won't hide." Silence settled between them. Not awkward. Not tense. Just honest. "You understand this could cost you," he said gently. "It already cost me something once," she replied. Settling. He stepped closer. "Victoria, I don't want your company. I don't want your power." She held his gaze. "I know. I don't want headlines. I don't want attention. I know." He swallowed. "I just want you." There it was. Not dramatic. Not rehearsed. Just truth. Victoria felt her breath catch. In a world where men had wanted her status, her connections, her influence, he wanted her. The woman. Not the empire. She stepped into him slowly. Close enough to feel the warmth of his presence. "Daniel Brooks," she whispered, "are you sure?" He smiled softly. "I've survived worse than gossip." She laughed quietly through emotion. "Choosing me isn't safe." He brushed a strand of hair away from her face. "Neither is loving someone halfway." The city glowed around them. And for the first time, Victoria didn't feel like she was standing at the top alone. She felt chosen. Not for what she built, but for who she was. She reached for his hand. And this time, she didn't hesitate. Weeks passed. The headlines faded when there was no scandal to feed them. Performance numbers silenced speculation. The board adjusted. Policies were clarified. Professional boundaries reinforced. Daniel earned a promotion, not gifted, but documented, justified, undeniable. And Victoria? She did something unexpected. She launched a new company initiative. Flexible leadership programs. Support for working parents. Mental wellness policies at executive level. Because love hadn't weakened her leadership. It had refined it. One Saturday evening, months later, the three of them stood on that same rooftop. But this time, it wasn't a corporate party. No cameras. No board members. Just quiet city air. Emma stood between them, holding both their hands. "Miss Victoria," she said thoughtfully, "are you staying for movie night?" Victoria smiled down at her. "If your dad says I'm invited." Emma looked up at Daniel seriously. "Daddy." Daniel laughed softly. "I think she's invited." Emma grinned and squeezed both their hands tighter. Victoria's heart felt full in a way no award or acquisition had ever managed. She looked at Daniel. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For not being intimidated." He shook his head gently. "I didn't choose the CEO." He looked into her eyes. "I chose the woman who deserved someone steady." Emotion shimmered in her gaze. For years, she believed strength meant standing alone. That love required compromise of ambition. That power demanded isolation. She was wrong. Strength was choosing vulnerability. Love was choosing honesty. And power? Power was standing beside someone who didn't need you smaller to feel bigger. The skyline sparkled around them. Emma leaned her head against Victoria's arm. And in that moment, the unstoppable CEO of Harrington Media wasn't thinking about stock prices. Or quarterly targets. Or public opinion. She was thinking about the quiet certainty in her chest. The peace. The steadiness. The risk worth taking. Because sometimes the greatest love stories don't begin with grand gestures. They begin with a tissue offered in silence. And a man who sees the crack in your armor. And stays. The city continued to pulse. The world continued to move. But on that rooftop, beneath endless Manhattan lights, Victoria Hayes finally understood something life-changing. She hadn't lost anything the night Lucas walked away. She had gained clarity. And in choosing Daniel Brooks, she didn't lose power. She found something stronger. Home.